I'm being Kim. Today I'm going to talk about some of our recent work, including interpretability beyond feature attribution called TCaV. This is work with awesome people inside and outside of Google who are listed here. So the agenda of my research is interpretability. And that means we want to help people use machine learning more responsibly and more safely. To me, that means we want to ensure that model can respect values that we care, such as fairness, and to ensure that model can reflect our domain expert knowledge when we want it. I particularly care that the explanation should be available for everyone. You shouldn't need a computer science or machine learning degree to leverage this powerful tool. And for them to use machine learning safely and responsibly, we need interpretability. So before jumping right onto interpretability method, I thought I would just lay out some basic ingredients for interpretability method. If you're familiar with optimization problem, how many people here are familiar with what optimization is? All right, lots of folks, great. It doesn't matter if you don't. I'll explain what it means. So optimization problem, you can view interpretability as an optimization problem. It is about finding the explanation E such that you can best do on this particular metric, Q in this case. So find E such that Q is maximized. This Q in this case can be some subjective measure by human. You ask human, how is this explanation? Or better way to do it, what I often do is give human tasks that requires good understanding of how model is making decision and measure how well they do on those tasks and use that as a proxy for how good explanation was. Now, sure, it's an optimization problem. What other things matter when we learn this explanation? Model matters. If you have a simple model like this, linear model, then your explanation might be different. Let me just continue. Well, so model matters. If you have a complex model like this, squirrely line, then your explanation might have to be different. Data matters. If you're lucky and you have such a clean data like this, beautifully linearly separable, then your explanation can be just something simple. But we all know that data is never like that simple. Often case we'll see one class crossing over the other decision boundary, in which case you might need something a little more complex for you to get a full head around what's going on. Human matters, whom you're generating this explanation for. If you're generating for a newbie, that would be different from if you're doing it for some expert. Task matters. If you're working on some high-stake domains, you might have more budget for understanding and parsing that explanation. Maybe more complex explanation might be better fit. The final goal of what you're trying to explain matters. Local and global is a different distinction, important distinction that we should make here. Local explanation means that you have a particular data point that you're interested in explaining, and your goal is to just explain this one data point as best as you can. Whereas global explanation means your goal is to understand overall behavior of your model. So given this equation, we can think about breaking down interpretability methods in multiple ways. First, you might just be interested in explaining the data, so you don't have a model like the first equation. If you have a model that is fixed and you can't change it or you can't retrain it, then you might be interested in post-training explanation. But sometimes you can relearn the model and jointly train explanation and the model at the same time. In other words, building inherently interpretable model. These are all important areas, but today I'm going to focus on one type of interpretability method, post-training explanation. I'm going to talk about two parts, spending a lot more time on the second one than the first one. So let's jump right in. First, we're going to revisit some of the existing popular interpretability method and ask some questions. So let me be a little more concrete. Here again, we have a model that's fixed. We're not going to retrain it. And let's just say you have a model like neural network that takes a picture and tells you what was in the picture. In this case, it says, oh, there was a cash machine. Interpretability question here is, why was this a cache machine? One of the most popular techniques to answer this question is called saliency map. Now, saliency map assigns how important each input feature was for the prediction. Technically, it uses the first-order derivative, and this equation right here says, I'm going to take a derivative of the probability of the class with respect to every single pixel in this case, if you have an image. And intuitively, what that means is, if I change this pixel a little bit, how much would the probability of cache machine changes? If it changes a lot, it's an important pixel. If it doesn't change a lot, it's not an important pixel. So when you look at the results in the top picture, kind of makes sense. It looks like where there's a cache machine, it's brighter, and where there's no cache machine, it's less brighter. So that kind of makes sense. Let's fit this problem in our equation. Here, the model is typically neural network. The data is widely used for image data. And because you always have one picture that you're interested in explaining, you're interested in local explanation. Here, Q is human subjective judgment. While we have a quantitative measure of each pixel, there are just too many pixels for humans to look at. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to scan this picture and subjectively judge where most bright parts are and where are less bright parts are. So Q is subjective. So here's a sanity check question. If we agree that this equation kind of makes sense, then if I change the model a lot in some dramatic way, then the explanation should change. And that change should be detected by the quality function Q, by human. Human should know that something has changed. So that's what we tested. Here we took a perfectly good trained Inception V3 model, exhibiting superhuman performance, and got a saliency map for this bird. So it looks like the bird's belly is highlighted and bird's cheek is highlighted, so it kind of makes sense. But then we took the same model, copied it, and we randomized the last layer. And what this means is now we completely messed up a perfectly good model. It's now giving random prediction. It's completely useless. So now the model changes in some dramatic way. You would think the explanation should change, but it doesn't. So you might argue that these two pictures technically kind of different picture, but as a human, I don't think I can draw dramatically different conclusion looking at these two pictures. The belly of the bird is still highlighted. The cheek still looks like highlighted. So we did this for many different contemporary saliency map methods, some including my own method. And we randomize from the logit layer, the top layer of the neural network, in cascading manner and to working our way to the bottom layer. And we show that some of these methods don't even change a bit from humans' perception. We also have some quantitative measure in our paper. So what does this tell us? Well, it's telling us something that I repeatedly find in my research, confirmation bias. When we give someone an explanation that kind of is up to subjective judgment, humans are so good at just picking out the evidence that already agrees what you think. And we see this not just in science, but political environment and everywhere too. So just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean that it's true explanation. And it turns out that some of the other results that were found in similar time mathematically proved that some of these methods is just reconstructing the input, actually has nothing to do with prediction. And I think this is kind of interesting and good science, but kind of science that gives you more questions than answers. Because we don't know what these maps are showing and why some papers show that this was helpful for humans to improve their decision. So more studies needed. What this does give us is a wish list. What would you do differently? Well, maybe it was a problem that we left it up to human, that the Q was subjective. Maybe we need something more quantitative. Maybe it was a problem that we use pixels, because humans don't think in pixel space. Maybe we'll use something more intuitive, more high level. And maybe that can help layperson to understand explanations better. What else do we want? Well, local understanding is important, but sometimes your goal is to just get a succinct description of the model, and you want to get the idea of general global behavior of the model, so global understanding. So that's what we did in the second part. So again, problem is the same. Post-training explanation, we have a model. We're not going to change the model. And question is, why was this a cache machine? Now let's use the saliency map to help us think about what do we really want to ask. So as I stare at this picture, I notice that the human is kind of bright. And also I noticed that the cart behind the human, the wheel part, is kind of bright for some weird reason. So I started to wonder, well, maybe the human concept mattered. And the wheel concept mattered for some weird reason. And I would like to know if those concepts did matter, then I want to know which one mattered more. And if that was true for all other cache machine pictures or just this one picture. The problem is that we can't really express this high-level concept, human or wheels, using pixels, especially if you want to do it across many pictures. Now, you would have been able to answer this question if your input feature was human and wheels, but you didn't. I just made up these concepts. The whole point is to answer this question without having to retrain the model. So wouldn't it be great if we can have a quantitative measure of how important these concepts are that you just came up with on the fly after training? So that's what we did. This is called testing with concept activation vectors, TCaV. And TCaV provides quantitative explanation of how important the concept that you came up with after training for that prediction. And concept can be all sorts of different things, gender, race, or other things, as I will show you. So let me be a little more concrete. Let's say you have a neural network that takes a picture and predicts whether there's a doctor in this picture or not. I want to know whether the gender concept was important in this prediction. TCaV is like a microscope that gets attached to the model and outputs which concepts were important using a number between 0 and 1. So not a woman was important, woman was not as important, and this may not be something you want, depending on what you're trying to do. And TCaV gives you that explanation if and only if it learned the concept, the network had learned the concept, and we'll talk about how we can tell. So throughout the talk, I'm going to use slightly different example. Now we have a zebra classifier, and our question is whether stripedness concept mattered for this prediction. So let's jump right in. Well, you might say, well, okay, well, concept sounds good, but what do you even mean by concept? How do you represent the concept? Well, we do the simplest possible thing. We represent concept as a vector, and we gave it a name, concept activation vector, or CAV. To learn CAV, you need a couple of ingredients. First, you need examples of concepts, in this case, stripedness images, and you need some random images. Then there is your network that you want to investigate, and you have access to the activations of this network. Given an image, you can retrieve the activation. Now, given those, you pipe in these examples into the network, collect the activations, and you train a linear classifier to separate the random images from concept images. Then you take the vector that is orthogonal to the decision boundary, and that is your CAV. That's the vector. What does that mean? Well, this vector simply means that a direction is pointing from away from random to more like the concept. And this idea of having such a vector is not new. Remember the very first Word2Vec paper talked about the gender direction, that they got it simply by subtracting a bunch of men words minus woman words. This is just another way to retrieve that vector. Oh yeah, went forwards. All right, so now I have this vector. What am I going to do with this vector? How do you get that quantitative explanation or the TCaV score? It's also very simple. The core idea of TCaV is taking the directional derivative of the logit layer, the probability of zebra, with respect to that vector we just got. And intuitively, what this means is if I make this picture more like the concept or a little less like the concept, how much would the probability of zebra changes? If it changes a lot, it's an important concept. If it doesn't change a lot, it's not an important concept. And we do that for many, many zebra pictures to get more robust and reliable explanation. And the final score, TCaV score, is simply the ratio of zebra pictures where having stripedness positively increased the probability of zebra. In other words, if you have 100 pictures of zebras, how many of them returned positive directional derivative? And that's it. And this is like the simplest possible way to define this. You can fit in, you can change this to that fits your application. You can flip the inequality. You can do all sorts of things, get the magnitude of the directional derivative, and so on. And that's it. Super simple. One more thing, though. We got this CAV, the vector, from high-dimensional activation space. So we kind of wonder, well, what if this vector returned high sensitivity by chance? Can we check? So here's one way to check it. So remember when we learned the CAV, we got the random images and separated it from the concept images. Now they're random, so you can put any sets of random images that you want as many times as you want. And each dose experiment will return a vector. So at the end of the day, you have many vectors. And each CAV, that vector, will return a TCaV score. And at the end of the day, you have lots of TCaV scores for one class, in this case, zebra. Then you can view these TCaV scores as samples from a distribution. And if that stripes were important for zebra, you're going to get this nice-looking Gaussian distribution. It's kind of coherent. And then we compare that to TCaV scores with random CAVs, where random CAVs are trained with random images and random images. And we check that these distributions are statistically significantly different. And only then we use that concept to provide you that quantitative explanation. If we didn't pass this and we say, well, you're interested in this concept, but network may not know it, maybe it wasn't important for the class, so we can't provide you explanation. And that is the full technical story. So this sounds fun, but why should you care? Well, I think this method offers a unique benefit, which is that explanation now speaks your user's language. Your user don't have to come and learn machine learning. Instead, if you're dealing with doctors, as I'll show you soon, we can provide that explanation in the language that they speak and answer the hypothesis they have using their own terms, diagnostic terms, for example. And of course, you can do it without having the training data already tagged with concepts. You can use some other data set that has that concept as a proxy to get some insights into your model, and so on. So let me share with you some of the results. First result is a sanity check experiment. I like sanity checks. So what is this is, I crafted an experiment where I know which concepts were important and check that TCaV can match that ground truth. That's what I just said. So how do we do this? There are lots of different ways to do it, but here's the setup. I have an image, and I programmatically wrote caption. So if there's a cab, I'm going to write CAB, cab. Why do I do this? Well, I am artificially creating two concepts. Here, network can now use either the image or the caption for classification. Then I created 4 different training data sets with different noisy level. What do I mean by noisy? Well, 30% noisy means 30% of the time I wrote something random. So instead of cab, I wrote tiger. And this is just to encourage to train different networks to do different things. And then I gave these networks a test image without a caption. Why? Because if network consider the image concept is important, then it would do pretty well with these test images. If we cared about the caption concept, it wouldn't do very well, right? So this metric can be served as the ground truth for how important the concept was, the image concept was. So here's the results for two classes, cap and cucumber. Blue line is the ground truth. You want to see blue line to be close to the green line, which is the TCaV score for image concept. And for cap, it is. It apparently, no matter how much noise that I insert in the caption, for cap class, it always looked at the image, never cared for captions. For cucumber case, it's slightly different. When I gave it a perfect caption, 0% noisy, then the accuracy was low. So there are three classes. Random is 33%, so this looks pretty high, but it's actually pretty low. And TCaV score for image closely follows that pattern. So that's cool, but maybe this experiment was so simple that saliency map can do it too. Maybe. So here are results for saliency map. Each row is one of those 4 trained network. And the column, the black and white image columns, are different types of saliency map methods. And the last column is actually my own work. So remember, cap class never cared for captions. So it should not look at the captions. But it looks like when I give it an image with the caption, it looks like the caption part is highlighted, giving you the misinformation. So, but maybe you cherry pick this example, maybe. So we tested with Turkers to ask 50 Turkers and gave them set of images and set of the saliency maps on the right and asked them which concept was more important in your view. And the result is really interesting. So remember, there are 2 concepts. So if you randomly choose, your accuracy is 50%. Humans can do 52%. So it's basically random. Humans can't tell. And when Turkers are often split half and half. So half of the Turkers would say, oh, it's definitely captions. And half of the Turkers would say, oh, it's definitely images. And more alarmingly, when they're wrong, they're very confident. And this is something that I repeatedly see again, confirmation bias. When they see something that they like, they're like, yes, of course I was right. 40% of people either correct or incorrectly answered. They marked that they're as confident as they can ever be. And this means that whenever we design an interpretability method, provide explanations to people, we have to make sure this cognitive side, the capacity of humans, limitations, or rather, feature not a bug, human side of it, when we serve this explanation very carefully. So we did this, we were excited, this works. We took it to ask questions to one of the widely used image classification network, Inception V3 and GoogleNet. Here we tested various set of concepts, color for fire engine, race, and objects. So if you look at the fire engine on the left top corner, red color was important for fire engine. So that makes sense if you're from an area where fire engines are red. There are lots of places in the world where fire engines are yellow. For example, this picture is from Canberra, Australia. I actually met a person who knew exactly which fire station this is. And there's a really good reason, actually, why fire engines should be yellow. I encourage you to look it up. It's pretty fascinating. Other results, there were previously qualitatively conjectured. Now we can quantitatively verify that, yes, one of the first Deep Dream blog posts talked about this neuron that shows muscular arm, and they conjectured that, oh, maybe the arms matter when we classify dumbbell. Now we can quantitatively show that, yes, the arms did matter. And this brings us to one of the first goals that we set out to achieve, which is we want to ensure that the model can respect values such as fairness that we care. And maybe this tool might be useful. Now, even more excited with this result, we took it to the real world. Well, kind of real world from my perspective, medical application. So diabetic retinopathy is a condition where if you treat it early, you're okay, but if left alone, you might lose your sight. So Brain Medical team created this highly accurate model, 85% accuracy. And now our question is, well, if I were a doctor, I want to ask whether the model is using the very diagnostic concepts that I was taught to use. So the question is it using those concepts? So we went to a doctor and asked her, what are the concepts, what are the diagnostic concepts that you expect to see for these two levels? DR level 4 is most serious level of diabetic retinopathy. We also, and one is the mild one. We also ask, what do you not expect to see? So results are interesting. So when model's accuracy was high, like DR level 4, we show that TCaV answers that model is using the concepts that doctors would have used. So green bars are high, red bars are low, things are good. Story was slightly different when model's accuracy was medium. And in this case, it showed that it was using the concept that doctors did not expect to see. And later, we dig this farther and learned that this class, the level 1, was often confused with level 2. And level 2 had high level of this HMA feature, which is a type of hemorrhage in your blood vessel. So this time, the model was using something inconsistent than what doctors would have used. And that gets to us the second point that we set, the goal that we set out to achieve, which is we want to ensure that model can reflect domain expert knowledge when we need it. So that's it. That is a pretty genetic method for getting the explanation. Since this paper was published, there are lots of different forms of data that TCaV was applied. One of the students that I met a couple of months ago at a conference, she extended this to extended to regression models, because this is a classification model, and applied to breast cancer data, further confirmed with doctors that this is consistent with other statistical methods that they sought for. So in summary, TCaV provides this quantitative explanation of the concepts that you chose after training, if and only if it had learned about that concept. And hopefully, tools like this that are easy to use, we can help people use machine learning more responsibly. Thank you.